Hi everyone, my name is Tal and this is Diligence. If you asked me what channel on YouTube I think everyone should subscribe to, I think I would definitely say Cosmic Skeptic, hands down. Alex O'Connor is the first YouTuber I've ever supported on Patreon. I've watched many of his videos more than once. He's one of the few people who could make me automatically doubt my positions. Like, if his take on something is different from mine, not only would I rethink my position, I would do so assuming that I'm going to end up discovering I was wrong. Basically, I heart Alex. Recently, he released a video about fallacies and how people sometimes don't really understand them well enough and end up saying that some things are fallacies when they actually aren't. I think that learning to spot fallacies is one of the best ways to have better founded opinions and more productive conversations. So obviously I was happy that Alex decided to make this video. And it is a great video, but it's not as good as it should have been. He named the video How Not to Use Logical Fallacies with Examples. Why would you explicitly mention the examples in the title? Wouldn't you expect there to be examples in a video like this? The irony is that the real-life examples that he gives are, well, problematic. Now, you might say that my complaints are really petty, and you'd be right, they are. But Alex's video is pretty much an ode to being precise with your words, a serenade to semantics. I mean, who cares if someone thinks an ad hominem is the same as insult, right? We get that they mean insult, and that's what really matters. Only we do think it really is important that people say insult when they mean insult, and that they say ad hominem when they mean ad hominem. The distinction is important if we want to make our communication as clear as we can. So I think that some pettiness is actually not inappropriate here. So let's get to it. Alex talks about how not every mention of emotions or a word that has emotional connotations is automatically an appeal to emotion or fallacious. He's absolutely correct about that, and he gives a few very good examples. But the main example that he uses, his real-life example, is really not that great.
It came at the end of a lengthy argument, but we were talking about people who call animal slaughter murder. I said, I can't deny that if you define murder as the taking of innocent life without good reason, then those who eat meat for taste pleasure alone are supporting murder. But I've never gone around pointing at people and calling them murderers. As you say, that's not helpful at all. Here's the response. Well, here's the thing, Alex. The fact that you're using the word innocent in front of the word life is an example of appeal to emotion. It's one of the reasons why people ignore you. I repeat, I do not dislike you or your stance. It's your rhetoric that is what turns me off.
I have to say something here. I don't know who the other Twitter is, but there are very few people that wouldn't look completely ridiculous explaining to a YouTuber with nearly 400,000 subscribers who'd hosted on his podcasts the likes of Richard Dawkins, William Lane Craig, Peter Singer, and others, all before the age of 21, why people ignore him. Come on. But okay, back to the crux of Alex's example and to his explanation.
The word innocent is obviously just a tool that I'm using to get an emotional response out of you, right? No. Right, I was using the word innocent because it changes the ethical situation if someone is innocent or guilty. Imagine that instead of talking about murder, we're talking about false imprisonment. Right, and I say that false imprisonment is defined as the imprisonment of an innocent person. Now, this tweeter might say that I'm committing an appeal to emotion because I use the word innocent in front of the word person. But the word is necessary to the definition. Right? Without the word innocent, false imprisonment would just be defined as the imprisonment of a person. I need to use the words innocent person, not because I'm trying to tug on your heartstrings, but because it's a necessary part of the definition that I'm talking about.
Those with a keen eye might notice a significant difference between these two sentences, and that difference is the words without good reason. These words render the word innocent somewhat redundant. If we change the imprisonment example to include these words, if we define false imprisonment as the imprisonment of an innocent person without good reason, then all of a sudden omitting the word innocent doesn't actually change the sentence quite as much, does it? The definition would become imprisonment of a person without good reason, which I'd say is pretty accurate. The same thing could be said about the definition of murder in Alex's tweet. The word innocent is not strictly a necessary part of it. It's redundant. Alex's point wouldn't change dramatically if we changed taking an innocent life without good reason to taking a life without good reason, right? One could say that the only change is in the way it influences us emotionally, or, in other words, the way it appeals to our emotions. So, not the best example. The thing is that, and this is true for many fallacies, the fact that Alex committed a fallacy doesn't actually invalidate his point. If we're being honest in our discussion, spotting a fallacy shouldn't get us to dismiss the whole point being made. We should try to remove the fallacy and see if the point stands. If there is a point there that's worth discussing, it's okay for us to mention the fallacy, but then we should address the point. We can also be extra cordial and elegantly ignore the fallacy and still just respond to the point. The one thing we shouldn't do is use the fallacy to turn attention away from the point that was made. Usually, as is the case here, the fallacy is not all that's there, so why would you only respond to that? Doing that is in itself a type of informal fallacy called a red herring, which is the fallacy of saying something to change the focus of the conversation. It doesn't have to be about mentioning a fallacy that the other side committed. Whenever you say something to change the focus of the conversation instead of addressing a point that was made, that's a red herring. So the problem with this response wasn't so much to the fact that it wrongly labeled Alex's words as an appeal to emotion fallacy, which to a degree it actually was, but rather the use of the fact that Alex committed a fallacy to avoid talking about the subject itself. Another fallacy that Alex brings up is the Strawman Fallacy. He rightly explains that a strawman fallacy occurs when you misrepresent your conversation partner's point, making it easier for you to debunk. And again, he's right on the money about what the fallacy is, but the example, not that great.
After I posted a video about veganism, claiming that we don't have the right to harm an animal for the sake of taste pleasure, someone tweeted the following to me. Admittedly, you do strawman the omnivorous side of the fence. There are other options for nutrition, sure, but that doesn't mean it all comes down to only taste, as you continuously say it does. If you want to be taken seriously, steelman the opposing argument instead.
Man, what is up with these people? Really? If you want to be taken seriously? I mean, yes, there are many names bigger than Alex J. O'Connor, but to say that he isn't taken seriously is just laughable. Anyway, my first, pettier problem with what Alex brings for us is this.
This person thinks that I'm strawmanning the meat-eater's position by claiming that the only justification they have for eating meat is taste pleasure. Their position is actually that it's about getting proper nutrition as well. So when I say it's only about taste pleasure for them, I'm strawmanning them.
This person, tweeting back at Alex, acknowledges that there are other options for nutrition, but they say that it doesn't mean that taste is all it comes down to. Now, I may be overly charitable here, but it seems to me that they're saying there are other options for nutrition, so it's not about that, but that still doesn't mean that it's just about taste. That is, there is something else besides nutrition and taste that justifies killing animals. What that something is, I have no idea, but it seems to me like that's what they're trying to say, but I could be wrong. Alex responds as though the claim was that it's just about nutrition, and this might actually be a strawman fallacy. But that's not the part that makes this a bad example. What makes this a bad example is that even if, as Alex understood it, that tweet really did say that it's a strawman because Alex doesn't address the nutrition point, this example still doesn't work all that well. If you've never seen the video that they're tweeting about, this example actually does work. However, if you are a cosmic skeptic fanboy like myself, then you'd know that if someone is only responding to what's being said in that video, they may be forgiven for thinking that Alex doesn't really address the health issue.
And it's not like we need eggs to be healthy. Hopefully the animal protein will give you enough energy to continue complaining about how poorly Spain treats its bovines.
These two parts are literally all I could find in this video that pertains to health. I think it's fair to say that this isn't a great response to this point.
Take stock of what's happened here. The meat eater says, I eat meat for nutrition. I respond by saying, you can get the nutrition elsewhere. The only thing that you can't get elsewhere is the way it tastes, which isn't a good enough justification to harm an animal. And the meat eater responds, you're straw manning me, right? I just told you that it's not about taste for me, but nutrition as well. No, I haven't straw manned you by understanding your position, representing it correctly, and showing why what you claim to believe is false.
Now I think I can see why Alex chose this example. It illustrates a specific type of misattribution of the strawman label that occurs when someone mistakes rejection of a claim for failure to acknowledge that claim. Like he says,
I haven't straw manned you by understanding your position, representing it correctly, and showing why what you claim to believe is false.
But the thing is, Alex, that in this specific video, you didn't really represent their position correctly. Right? Rather, you sort of just waved it off. So if the person launching this accusation at him is responding only to this video, I wouldn't blame them for thinking that Alex just doesn't discuss the point about nutrition, or at least that he significantly underplays it in a way that makes his case easier. What one might call the Strawman Fallacy. To be able to say that this person on Twitter doesn't understand what the Strawman Fallacy is based on this example, we need to assume that they are aware of the rest of Alex's views and are responding with those in mind, and there is no reason for us to assume that that's the case. Then again, the video that they were discussing wasn't trying to be a full case against consuming animal products. It doesn't actually make sense to expect everything that anyone ever says on any topic to include full representation of the other side's views. There is nothing wrong with a video about society's cognitive dissonance with respect to mistreatment of animals that doesn't include a full response to every issue regarding health. So, in this example, again, the problem isn't necessarily that the person accusing Alex of committing a fallacy doesn't know what the fallacy is. There is a good chance that they do. The problem is the fact that they jump to conclusions, assuming that if Alex doesn't say it in this video, he doesn't say it at all. And that's a very silly and wrong assumption. It's intellectually lazy. Now again, if these points seem petty, it's because they are. But it is important if we want to help people learn to identify fallacies and distinguish between them. When he discusses the Strawman Fallacy, Alex makes a couple of remarks that I want to address.
It's not even accurate to call this a logical fallacy at all, by the way, since it's an informal fallacy rather than a logical one.
Right, it is an informal fallacy. Specifically, it's a type of red herring. But the same is true of the other two fallacies you talk about in this video. I'm not sure why this is even relevant, but if it is, why bring it up in the context of this fallacy specifically?
Now, I would also say that there is an implicit understanding that the person does this intentionally. Right? If I intentionally misrepresent an opponent's position, this would be a straw man. But I can also do this unintentionally. Now, technically, you can still call this a straw man, but if it was a genuine mistake, and not just an attempt to make things easier for myself, I don't think it's too helpful to accuse people of committing the fallacy, which usually has the implication that it's being done on purpose to make the argument easier to defeat.
I don't know that I fully agree with this point. When someone unintentionally makes a fallacious argument, you can still call it fallacious, not just technically, literally. Fallacies could be a sly tactic of demagogy and manipulation, but they often aren't, and they still remain just as fallacious and just as important to spot and call out. Identifying fallacies isn't about attributing malice, it's about logic and reason. I do agree that it isn't...
It's too helpful to accuse people of committing the fallacy.
But we can call it out without making it into an accusation. If we're trying to foster open dialogue and intellectual integrity, we should push for being open to such criticism on the one hand, and for not being dicks when we give these criticisms on the other. And just like the previous point, why make this remark specifically about the Strawman fallacy? Can't people commit other fallacies unintentionally? Or are you saying that while all fallacies can be committed both intentionally and unintentionally, the distinction is somehow more important in regards to this particular fallacy? A few final thoughts. I do think that Alex's video is about something important. Like I said, the ability to detect fallacies is one of the best things you can do for your reasoning and your conversations. The thing is that real life is messy, and in real life conversations, online or offline, not all arguments are clearly laid out in syllogisms. Not all objections are necessarily present. There's a lot of implicit content, and the context is often lacking. This means that it's much easier to mislabel something as a fallacy or as mislabeling. Finding clear-cut example of this happening, though, in real life isn't that easy, which I guess might be the reason Alex chose to mention the examples in his title to begin with. Not everyone gives examples from real life, because it's hard. This is also the reason why his non-real life examples are actually excellent. For me, the main takeaway is this. Keen as I am on spotting fallacious reasoning, I don't necessarily think we should make them the focus of the conversation whenever we find them. Finding fallacies should be primarily about not falling victim to them, not about shaming others for committing them. It's good to notice that the word innocent appeals to your emotion, so you could remind yourself that you shouldn't let that influence you. But there is no reason for it to be a conversation stopper. And no, the fact that Alex used it is not the reason people ignore him. I mean, it wouldn't be the reason even if people did ignore him. The same is true for the other side of the coin. Realizing when someone mislabeled something as a fallacy should be more about correcting their mistake and less about pointing their mistake out. We want to use these skills to have better conversations, not to have conversations about these skills. And yes, sometimes those things should be conversation stoppers, or conversation pausers at least. If someone's whole argument is fallacious, we need to address that. Or if someone keeps making the same fallacy over and over, it might be worth pointing that out. And in the same way, if someone keeps pointing out fallacies or jumping to conclusions, it might be worthwhile to pause the conversation to talk about that. But the goal of this should always be to advance the conversation, not to show how good we are at finding fallacies. I'd love to get your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this, click on that like button would be greatly appreciated. You don't need to smash it though, a light tap is good enough. If my pettiness put you off, feel free to click the dislike button, I won't take it personally. And that one you can smash, it's okay. If you want to see some of my less petty videos, then do subscribe to my channel. And if you're not subscribed to Cosmic Skeptic yet, then do yourself a favor and subscribe to it. Or to Alex's short clips channel if you prefer them in bite-sized chunks, perfect for when you're on the toilet. Both channels are linked down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember, our world is complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Have a good one.